Spooky salutations! It's that time of year again, time to talk about something creepy. So, what's our subject for this year?
I don't know, you had them last!
Some of you may be familiar with werewolves as people cursed to turn into half-man, half-wolf monsters every full moon, who pass the curse on to anyone they bite. Some of you may know them as eco-terrorist hippies with abilities fueled by the mystical power of being really, really angry. So let's start with what a werewolf is according to traditional sources. Here is a typical description. Werewolves are certain sorcerers who, having anointed their bodies with an ointment which they make by the instinct of the devil, and putting on a certain enchanted girdle, does not only unto the view of others seem as wolves, but unto their own thinking have both the shape and nature of wolves, so long as they wear said girdle. So lycanthropy or shapeshifting as generally conceived is not a superpower or a curse, but something carried out as a magical ritual. Also notable is that in this description, an actual metamorphosis of the physical body is not mentioned. Roland goes out of his way to state that the werewolf believes that he has become an animal, and that he seems like one to other people, where if he had simply said that the man becomes a wolf, these elaborations would be unnecessary. This is conspicuous, and to clear up any ambiguity, we can look at the Malafikaram, the foremost document on the medieval Christian understanding of witchcraft. Therefore, it is evident the demons cannot actually affect any permanent transformation in human bodies, that is to say, no real metamorphosis, and so we must refer the appearance of any such change to some dark and occult cause. So it seems that the traditional understanding is that a physical transformation from man into animal is impossible, but that using some ritual technique it is possible to evoke a delusion to that effect, in oneself and others.
Wow, he's transforming into the exact same person.
It is also likely that a non-human intelligence is involved in the process, as both our descriptions speak of the intervention of demons, whereas the Milius also admits that many magical operations have nothing to do with demons and are affected by natural causes. Now, in this werewolf ritual, there are two elements involved in the transformation. These are an ointment or potion and a special piece of clothing. Let's start with this ointment. We hear about something similar in the Picatrix. If you light a lamp with this and anoint someone's face with it, that person will appear in the shape of that animal to witnesses. This mixture can be made from the heads of various animals, and thus that person would have the appearance of various animals. This demonstrates that the ointment is not an invention of witch hunters, but something actually employed by magicians. Psychoactive fat-soluble ointments were historically rubbed into the skin in European folk medicine, such as the so-called flying ointment that later became associated with the early modern witch trials. Such an ointment used in this context could perhaps break down the barriers of the practitioner's ego and ordinary persona, allowing them to mentally become another being through mimicry. In other words, werewolves were tripping balls. But what are we to make of the so-called enchanted girdle? No such object is mentioned in the Picatrix operation or in the Milius. Well, let's look at some older descriptions and see if we can put the pieces together. Here's one from an early medieval Archbishop of Canterbury. If anyone at the calends of January goeth about as a stag or bull calf, that is, making himself into a wild animal, and dressing in the skins of a herd animal, and putting on the heads of a beast, those who in such wise transform themselves into the appearance of a wild animal, let them do penance for 3 years, because this is devilish. While this does not describe werewolves per se, but rather were-stags and were-bull calves, it does describe the shapeshifter as wearing a specially prepared article of clothing, that being the pelt including the head of the intended animal. Note that the head of the animal was an ingredient in the mixture found in the Picatrix, representing a possible corruption in which the two items have become fused together in certain places. Also note that this source comes from a time when there were still many heathens among the Anglo-Saxons in England, connecting the shapeshifting practices to pre-Christian Germanic ritual. This reminds us of the Berserkers and Ulfhednar, Scandinavian warriors who wore bear pelts or wolf pelts and would descend into a wild frenzy in battle, roaring and howling like beasts and possessing exceptional strength and pain tolerance.
Go crazy?
Don't mind if I do!
As we see from these Old Norse sources. I'll ask of the Berserkers, you tasters of blood, those intrepid heroes, how are they treated? Those who wade out into battle. Wolf-skinned they are called. In battle they bear bloody shields. His men went without mailcoats and were frantic as dogs or wolves. They bit their shields and were as strong as bears or boars. They slew men, but neither fire nor iron could hurt them. It seems that by imitating the animal and wearing its hide, the intention of these shapeshifters was to channel the animal spirit which would take control of them, bestowing the traits of that animal on the host. In the case of these berserkers, the traits they wanted were strength, fury, and savagery to terrorize their enemies, which they obtained by ritually becoming bears or wolves. In the Germanic world, the Mannabund or warrior band was associated with the god Odin or Woden, who also has a connection to wolves, possessing 2 of them as companions. But this type of shapeshifting is not restricted to Germanic traditions at all. Stories from Ossory in Ireland include people who become wolves by donning their pelts, and people whose spirits leave their bodies in the shape of wolves. An Irish text called the Coran Man mentions a band of mercenaries who wore wolf pelts and fought with extreme brutality, dwelling near what is now Tipperary, and claims that they could become wolves at will. Fragmentary linguistic and mythological evidence among other Indo-European cultures has convinced historians that ritually becoming a wolf was part of the initiation tradition of the Korios, a band of youths who left their host society to live in the wilderness, hunting, raiding enemy tribes and generally adventuring until they matured as men, at which point they left their beastly ways behind to marry and raise families, generally with foreign women in conquered enemy territory.
Crush your enemies, see them driven before you, and you hear the lamentation of your women.
Outside of wild northern Europe, these wolfish ways diminished, but remained as half-remembered legends like this one recounted by Pliny. Euanthes, who holds no contemptible position among the authors of Greece, writes that the Arcadians have a tradition that someone chosen out of the clan of a certain Anthus by casting lots among the family is taken to a certain marsh in that region, and hanging his clothes on an oak tree, swims across the river and goes away into a desolate place and is transformed into a wolf and herds with others of the same kind for 9 years, and that if in that period he has refrained from touching a human being, he returns to the same marsh, swims across it and recovers his shape, with 9 years age added to his former appearance.
You know, it turns out he's not a werewolf, he's just Greek.
This same shape-shifting process is also found in non-Indo-European cultures, such as the Leopard Society of Nigeria, who dressed as leopards, imitated their behaviour and wielded weapons meant to resemble claws, and similar groups from other parts of West Africa. These were exclusive groups of people who were believed to be liable to possession by the spirits of carnivorous animals such as leopards and crocodiles, and who carried out ritual killings while in a state of possession. During the course of the 20th century, the Liberian government outlawed these societies, but some of them nevertheless continued to function clandestinely. There is also the Yi Naldlushi of Navajo culture, also known as a skinwalker.
Skinwalker?
Skinwalker. Texas Skin Ranger.
A sorcerer who puts on the skin of a coyote or other animal in order to attack the livestock of his enemies. There are probably innumerable other examples of this kind of practice that have long since been forgotten, but how are we to account for the fact that these reports claim that the shapeshifters visibly appeared to onlookers as animals rather than men? And this problem does not only occur in the later accounts but from early times. In the Iliad, the Trojan warrior Dolon goes out to the Achaean camp at night, crawling on all fours and wearing a wolf pelt, hoping that the enemy will think he is merely a beast. The notoriously clever and cunning Odysseus sees through this disguise and captures Dolon, but it appears that Dolon expected anyone encountering him to really think he was a wolf. This seems bizarre to us because even at a casual glance and even in the dark of night, a man wearing a wolf pelt could never convince us he was anything else. Just from the way he moves as he crawls, he would immediately reveal himself as a man. It is possible that these pre-modern people were culturally conditioned to recognize men in animal pelts as animals, but I don't think the average person would have had enough contact with shapeshifters for such conditioning to really stick. So what other explanation can we offer, unless we admit that our ancestors could perceive things that we no longer can? Thanks for watching, and have a happy Halloween,